Hi folks, thanks very much for having me here. My first time stateside in quite a few years, but yeah, very happy to be here. So I'm going to talk today about a chapter that myself and Phelan McGowan at the University of Galway have contributed on undersum bias as an impediment to precautionary saving, and I'll get into some implications for pension saving as well. So I'm having the button difficulty here as well. There we go. Undersum bias. So what is it? First, I'm being slightly facetious, and I'm going to say that it may be a multiple discovery phenomenon because we had different teams independently come across it at around the same time. So when Phelan on our team was doing some work for the Pensions Authority in Ireland, he was trying to investigate exponential growth bias, which many of you will be familiar with. So when people need to contend with an exponential growth function, they tend to underestimate. So Phelan was doing some work on exponential growth bias, but then noticed that even when people are not contending with compound interest, they were underestimating the accumulation of money. At around the same time, Benjamin Scheibe-Henne, I've never said that name out loud before, so I might have pronounced it incorrectly. He produced this paper showing that people tend to underestimate grocery bills. So this was done in the lab and in the supermarket. And then more recently, Indranil Goswami produced a working paper showing 10 experiments on undersum bias. And we credit Goswami with the terming the bias undersum bias. We were calling it accumulation bias up till then, but we prefer undersum bias. So kind of different teams independently showing this evidence that people tend to underestimate the accumulation of money even before they need to contend with compound interest. And then this naturally has implications for saving. So why will I bother? If I'm going to underestimate how much I'm going to accumulate, why would I bother to start saving? It also has implications for our spending forecasts. So if I need to think about how much I'm going to spend in retirement, this bias suggests or describes that I might be likely to underestimate how much I'm going to need. And then a slightly more tenuous link that I'm going to try to put to you today is that it may also have implications for our risk forecasts. So if we are trying to forecast the accumulation of financial shocks, are we then likely to underestimate it? So I'm going to talk to you, instead of giving you the evidence for undersum bias, you'll have to read the chapter for that. I'm going to instead talk about a field experiment we did that tried to implement some interventions to overcome it. So we had the question on interventions in the early session, so that's what I'm going to try to describe today. So this was an experiment that was funded by the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission in Ireland, and it was facilitated by Bank of Ireland. And in it, the CCPC essentially had identified undersaving as a problem for financial well-being in Ireland. So in order to design our intervention, we did what all good researchers will do and go review previous trials. So we identify things that we should be trying to target, like mental accounting, pre-commitments, inattention, and so on. And we also had some survey data that we could analyse from the CCPC to look at the differences between those who have the financial capacity to save and don't, and the ones who have financial capacity to save and do, on a host of psychological characteristics. And there we saw that actually there was no difference in things like their level of self-control that they reported, but there were differences in their impulsivity. So essentially, I'm not thinking about the repercussions of not saving now. I'm just acting impulsively. I'm not failing to take into account the implications of not saving. So we came up with two interventions I'm going to show you the results of now. One is a combined nudge and boost. The main boost in there is a tool to try to help people overcome undersum bias. And then we also identified a cognitive bias that we're going to call the kind of underaccumulation or underestimation of the accumulation of financial shocks. I apologize if I'm speaking too quickly, especially with this accent here. But I'll show you the two interventions shortly, but this is just an overview of the trial. So we had our eligible customers randomly split to receive our communication that targeted that risk accumulation bias, or a well-being communication that the bank were planning to issue at around the same time. So that communication, both of them essentially just encourage people to save for financial shocks, so that rainy day account. Within those then, if they tried to open an account, they either got our nudge and boost form or an existing form online that the bank had was using as standard. So the main intervention that we've tested on our nudge and boost form is essentially this is an interactive calculator. So we have a consumer here who has planned to start saving on the 27th of January 2022, and they input how much their savings goal was. So this was for a rainy day account. They want to save €6,000. Here's an interactive calculator that the default was they weren't to use it. This is because of our ethics committee said that we had to default people away from our interventions, but people could opt into using it. And they were first asked if they had a date in mind for when they would like to reach their savings target. If they said yes, they input the date, and the calculator told them how much they'll need to save each month in order to reach that target. If they didn't have a date in mind, they could instead estimate how much they're planning to save each month, and our calculator will tell them when they will reach their goal. And they could use this as much as they wanted. Now, this calculator had been pre-tested in the lab, so Phelim, who's the co-author on it, he had run some studies showing that this was effective in the lab for trying to help people overcome undersum bias and exponential growth bias. So this is our field test of that intervention. And then our second intervention there, that cognitive bias one, so the one that deals with cumulative risk. So our thoughts here, this is one that we hadn't kind of come across in the literature, but our thoughts is that if people are estimating the need for a rainy day account, they might be likely to focus on one bad outcome. So what's the probability my car is going to break down? I might reasonably expect that probability to be fairly low. But then there's evidence suggesting that people can underweight those probabilities. So, for example, optimism bias and so on will lead people to think, actually, no, maybe my car will be fine this year. One of the problems here as well is that if people are focusing on one bad outcome, they're unlikely to focus and take into account the other bad outcomes that might occur. So there might be a low probability my car will break down, a low probability that something in the house will go wrong, a low probability of an unexpected bill, a low probability my mobile phone breaks and I need to replace it. But all of those low probabilities will accumulate, meaning that there's a higher overall probability that I will need my rainy day savings fund. So this is what we try to target in our second intervention. I'm going to try to show you what this intervention looked like. Yes, my GIFs are working. So consumers that were enrolled in this trial were essentially issued an email. It came as a kind of long form infographic, but I've had to split it up here in order for it to show. But essentially we use the kind of risk communication strategies from health psychology to use natural frequencies here. 6 in 10 people face unexpected expenses each year, and that's an accurate figure for Ireland. We know that saving isn't easy, and saving for the unexpected is harder still, but it's easy for expenses to stack up. And you can see this grid here. It's essentially showing you the people who are hit by the different expenses, and there's very few people then left at the end who haven't faced some financial shock. So we're trying to kind of get that idea across to consumers. We also told them about some data that we had on the number of people who face more than one financial shock each year, and then they could then link off either to our control application form or the one that incorporated that calculator. So overall, the RCT design, so our eligible consumers had no financial difficulties, they didn't have the account in question, and they had consented to marketing materials. 160,000 customers then in the trial, which is the largest one for Ireland. We're a small place, so this is a very big number for us. 4 main experimental groups here, so they either got our control communication and control form, control communication and our boost form, risk communication and control, or risk communication and boost. Had about 35,000 in each. Those of you who are quick with mental arithmetic will tell that that does not add up to 160,000. This is because we also included a no contact control. So these are eligible consumers who we did not contact, and we wanted to say, okay, how many of them are going to open an account over the trial period? Timing is important. So it was run in 2021, where there's a period of very low savings account uptake due to COVID lockdown. But this is the main trial. So if I'm referring to this, it's the 2x2 RCT. At the same time, we were able to run an organic A/B test, is what we call it. So organic is the lingo that the bank were using, but essentially anyone who may not have received our marketing communications, but otherwise opted into trying to open one of these accounts, were randomized to see either the control form or our nudge and boost form. Okay, so on to the results. These are fairly straightforward to show. So firstly, I can show you, so you'll see the percentage of those who are issued that direct email communication. Very, very low numbers here, but this is our no contact group. And then our business as usual group, you can see that there is essentially no difference between them, which is not something that the bank was very happy to hear. But it is good news for our interventions. So firstly, those who received the well-being, so the controlled communications, and then accessed our boost form, they were significantly more likely to finish the form or open up a savings account. So this is using that interactive calculator. See here, we also get a significant difference on those who saw our risk communication email, so they were significantly more likely to open the account. And then we were really hoping for that kind of additive effect of both of these interventions, but we didn't see it. So we may have hit sort of a ceiling there on it. So just some details from the models there on it. We can include socio-demographic controls for consumers that we have them as well in the models. So I'm going to move on to, we not only looked at how many accounts were opened, but also how much people opted to save. So we looked at their initial deposits, which was the direct debit that they then set up. In this, so the main 2x2 trial, we see no difference essentially against the amount that people tried to save. And then just very quickly on our that organic, so the ones where people did not receive a communication from us, but they otherwise themselves went onto the bank's website and tried to open a savings account. Here, there was about a 40%, if I go with my relative to make my effect size sound really, really big, a 40% increase in the conversion rates when people could use the calculators. And we have some Google Analytics data to show that the effect was stronger among those who did use and opted into the calculator that we had. Here, however, we do see a difference in, it comes out in the models, it's a statistically significant difference in the deposits. So people who saw our calculator ended up saving less. So we had more people saving, but they were on average saving less. And when we include our income control in the model, that effect completely washes out. So I have a chart to explain this. But essentially, if we break people into different income groups and look the effect of our nudge and boost form, so this is firstly the control form. You can see slightly more people at the upper end, but on our nudge and boost form, the effect is stronger the lower your income. So we more than double here the lowest income group completing the savings account application form. And then importantly, from the bank's perspective, there's no negative effect on those in the highest income group. So it just kind of balances out. But essentially that nudge and boost calculator getting it under some bias appears to have helped in particular those lower income consumers to open a savings account. Very, very quickly on our spillovers, because I have 1 minute left. So obviously we're concerned that if you're going to start saving more, then that might lead you to borrow to cover the costs. So we looked at overdrafts, loans and credit card balances, other savings accounts that they opened with the same bank. This is all with the same bank as a caveat, and the current account balance, and we see no difference across the board. That's a slight lie. We do see a difference in whether they're in any form of debt, where we find that those in the intervention group who open an account are less likely to hold any form of debt. But because we've kind of tested so many hypotheses and so on in this, we don't really count that in the paper. We do have, so I'm going to just skim over the summary here, but hopefully this gives you an idea of kind of interventions that can be rolled out to overcome what we've termed, or what Goswami termed as under some bias, with implications for pension saving. The working paper, so that experiment was done with Deirdre Robertson and Pete Long. The working paper is available, getting older because our peer review process is very, very long, but there's still time to give us comments, so is what that means. But yeah, thank you very much, and looking forward to the discussion.